All right, with us now, CNN political commentator Alyssa Farah Griffin and former chief of staff to then Vice President Mike Pence, Marc Short. So, Alyssa, as David Challing just laid out, 2/3 of independents at this point oppose this bill that was just passed. 1/5 of Republicans, which is very high for a Trump-related situation here. What do you think of where this goes next?
This is always a challenge you run into when you do a huge sort of omni bill where you combine a bunch of different policies together. So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which were extended in this, were widely popular in the first Trump term. If that had been a standalone piece of legislation, that'd be something Trump could travel around the country and say, hey, the average family is going to save about $4,000 a year on their taxes because of my tax cuts. Some of the energy policy that's included is something he could brag about. But then there's the less popular aspects of it, some long-term cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. Those are things that end up getting lumped into the broader agenda and policy. But I'd say this, we're more than a year out from the midterms. Are Democrats going to be able to harness that and tell their voters, hey, these cuts that haven't come, they're actually delayed down the road, are a result of this bill? And I think it remains to be seen. Democrats have kind of struggled to find their messaging on this.
You know, Mark, it's interesting. In this same poll, and I don't have the number in front of me, but more voters than not say they do not approve of President Trump's priorities right now. One of those priorities has clearly been tariffs, which is something that you've spoken out against, many of the tariffs that he has tried to impose, then come back on, then imposed again. Greg Ip of the Wall Street Journal this morning has an interesting take on the tariffs. He writes, Trump has been clear and single-minded about his goal. He wants tariffs, the higher the better, whether that is achieved unilaterally or via deals is secondary. So even without deals, Trump has, by his own definition of success, already won his trade war. Greg Ip's point, Mark, is that Trump's got these 10% tariffs, in some cases higher across the board, and that's a win for him. What do you think about that?
John, I think that's right. I think that the president has actually had some pretty good economic news in the first 6 months. The jobs reports have been strong. The inflation has stayed relatively tame. The markets have hit all-time highs. As Alyssa said, he just passed tax extension relief. But I worry that I don't think the tariff impact has really happened yet. I think the largest retailers in our country pre-purchased inventory. Some of the largest auto manufacturers are still selling automobiles that were basically built with parts prior to tariffs taking effect. And so I think that there's a lot more damage to the economy coming with this protectionist trade policy. And as Greg said in his piece, and as you're articulating, the reality is that the 10% baseline tariffs are already 4 times greater than what our average has been for the last couple of decades. And there's no indication they're going down. Like, people question that the president's going to chicken out and actually threaten tariffs and lower them. But still, the trend is to continue to bring tariffs up higher and higher. And so the costs are going to continue to grow. And I think you're going to see job implications of that as well in the second half of this year.
We did just see in the CPI numbers that came out yesterday a little bit of an uptick in inflation there, though a lot of people think is the first bite that these tariffs might be taking. I want to shift to Jeffrey Epstein and the defense now that President Trump is issuing. And I want to play again what he said just yesterday.
And we just made this system worse. This system is strained. We're going to close hospitals. People aren't going to.
All right, Debbie Dingell today playing the role of President Trump. I will read out loud for you a dramatic reenactment of what President Trump said about the Epstein case yesterday. Oh, wait, actually, we can have the actor do it himself. This is President Trump.
I would say that, these files were made up by Comey. They were made up by Obama. They were made up by the Biden we went through years of that.
All right, I want to read you what Scott Adams, the Dilbert creator, who's a huge fan of President Trump, said about this, and I'm going to try to not swear. Scott Adams wrote on Twitter, the new blank covering story is the Epstein files were made up by Democrats. I expect better BS from my president, he says.
I remain stunned by how bad the PR around this Epstein issue has been. I sort of think that the president may have been caught flat-footed on how big of an issue this was to his base. And Donald Trump is rarely not in lockstep with where his base is on issues. But listen, this is now a weeks-long story. The White House first needs to punt this to DOJ. Say, we're not talking about it any further. This is fully DOJ's purview. And DOJ needs to get out there and they need to unite around what is the narrative? Is there anything else that could be released? It's almost certain that there's grand jury jury testimony, there's victim testimony, things that can be redacted but released to the public that might assuage some of this just skepticism that there is nothing else there. But if I'm the White House, I'm distancing myself. I'm making it a DOJ problem. And you got to give Pam Bondi a little bit of time to say, you got to figure this out or we're moving a different direction.
Was that President Trump distancing himself?
No, it didn't make any sense. And his base won't buy that. This is something that is so animating. It is so deeply felt by his base. They feel like it is one of the most evil acts that could be committed, and they want accountability. That's not going to pass.
You know, Mark, another thing the president sort of said yesterday, to paraphrase, that the people who are fueling this story are basically bad people, the only people interested in it. These are his people. These are people who helped push him into office.
Yeah, John, I think it's important to step back for a second that when Donald Trump came onto the scene in 2015, 2016, he positioned himself as the outsider who was going to reform government. And a lot of his supporters view him as the truth teller who's there to actually unearth many of the secrets that they think are hid from them. And so when last year itself, during the campaign cycle, your now Attorney General, your FBI Director, your Deputy FBI Director, your Vice President all proclaimed that there's a lot of nefarious information in those files and they're going to make sure that they're released. And then you come into office and you say, I have the files on my desk. And then you say that we've issued the release of the files to a group of social media influencers. And then your narrative becomes actually there are no files. And yet now the narrative is that the files were created by Comey, Obama, and Hillary. I think it's quite a remarkable narrative arc. And I think that's really hard for a lot of people to try to stomach because they view him as the guy who's going to come to D.C. and unearth these things. And now it feels like it's a cover-up.
And just remember, Epstein was arrested and put in jail and then ultimately took his life during Donald Trump's presidency. Just very quickly, each of you, do you think Congress will ever take a vote on this? Do you think Republicans will let themselves take a vote on this where ultimately they would suggest they were trying to force something? Alyssa, first to you.
A discharge petition is the only way to do it. You'd have to get some Democrats to unite with Republicans and force a vote on the floor. I have no idea if that'll happen. Speaker Johnson, I don't think, would be eager to have that vote, but it could happen.
Mark, what do you think?
I think the president still has a lot of sway over the members in Congress. I don't see them having a vote on this. I do think at some point there'll be pressure. They have to release something. Whether or not what they release will be sufficient, John, I think is a question.
Well, Sarah Griffin, Mark Short, great to see you both. Thank you very much.